century-long struggle for freedom. The recent uprising in Iran, which demonstrated the Iranian people's rejection of the ruling theocracy, has its roots in a century of struggle for freedom in Iran. By the end of 19th century, the Iranian people revolted against the authoritarian rule of the Qajar dynasty, forcing the Qajar king to sign a constitutional decree in 1906, thereby limiting his powers and establishing the first elected parliament. The constitutional revolution was subsequently derailed by domestic enemies of democracy who joined forces with foreign powers. Pro-democracy leaders across Iran, such as Sattar Khan and Baqir Khan in the northwest, Mirza Kuchek Khan in the north, and others, rebelled against the authoritarian rule of the monarchy, but were suppressed. In 1921, an uneducated officer in the army took the reins of power through a British-backed coup, later declaring himself Reza Shah Pahlavi, the king of Iran. His reign ended at the height of World War II, when the Allies forced him to abdicate in favor of his son, Mohammad Reza. In the late 1940s, a popular and widely respected member of parliament, Dr. Mohammad Mossadegh, became the voice of the nation's aspirations to nationalize Iran's oil industry and was elected as prime minister in 1951. In 1953, a CIA and MI6 engineered coup d'etat aided by reactionary clerics, including Abul Qasim Kashani, and with the acquiescence of the pro-Soviet Communist Tudeh Party, brought down Mossadegh's government to the detriment of the Iranian people. Although Mossadegh's premiership lasted only a little more than 2 years, he went down in Iran's modern history as a champion of secular democracy and independence. Banished to his native village of Ahmadabad, Dr. Mossadegh never gave up, telling visitors that Iran had to rely on the energetic, dynamic younger generation to topple the Shah. In 1965, that dynamic younger generation, led by 3 progressive university graduates, Mohammad Hanif-Nejad, Saeed Mohsen, and Ali Asghar Badizadegan, founded the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran, PMOI-MEK. These young Muslims rejected both Islamic fundamentalism and Marxism, and instead embraced a democratic, modern, and tolerant interpretation of Islam, in essence, declaring a historic war on fundamentalist Islam. 2 years earlier, in 1963, the Shah crushed the nationwide uprisings, marking a definitive end to the era of peaceful political activity. From 1963 to 1979, the Shah's secret police Savak grew to symbolize the monarchic dictatorship, characterized by the royal court's corruption, one-party rule, suppression of dissent, and torture and execution of dissidents. In 1971, Savak's sweeping raids resulted in the arrest of all MEK leaders and many cadres. In May 1972, the 3 founders of the MEK and 2 Central Committee members were executed. The only surviving member of the leadership was a charismatic young man named Masoud Rajavi. While in prison, Rajavi described Islamic fundamentalism as the chief domestic threat to the anti-Shah movement and warned against the advent of religious despotism symbolized by Khomeini. Throughout the 1970s, the Shah's regime tortured or executed many dissidents. Among them, for example, were renowned poet Khosrow Gol Sorkhi and prominent political prisoners like Bijan Jazani. By the end of the decade, millions across the country were voicing their opposition to the monarchy. The nationwide demonstrations eventually toppled the Shah's regime. Regrettably, the many years of repression had all but decimated the democratic opposition, enabling an imposter and opportunist like Khomeini and his band of fanatic clerics to usurp the leadership of a popular revolution. Released from prison after 7.5 years and only days before the fall of the Shah, the 31-year-old Rajavi skillfully guided the organization through its post-1979 struggle against the ruling mullahs. MEK's rejection of clergy dominance and call for democracy, personal freedoms, and rule of law attracted hundreds of thousands of people, especially women and youth, to its rallies. In the span of a few short months, the MEK became Iran's largest organized political opposition. The circulation of its newspaper, Mojahid, reached 500,000, surpassing official dailies. In 1980, Masoud Rajavi announced his candidacy for president, garnering the support of a majority of progressive political groups, especially women and youth.
چقدر شورانگیزه که ما امروز باز هم در دانشگاه که شهادتگاه آزادی است سخن از آزادی میگوییم. بله، بدون تضمین آزادی تمام احزاب و عقاید و قلم‌ها هیچ پیشرفت و بسیجی برای انقلاب متصور نیست.
Fearful of Rajavi's potential victory, Khomeini vetoed Rajavi's candidacy a week before the vote on the pretext that MEK has rejected the theocratic constitution based on the concept of the absolute rule of clergy. As the MEK's popularity grew, regime-organized thugs stepped up their attacks on its offices, rallies, and supporters. Some 70 MEK supporters were killed and 3,000 imprisoned. Nevertheless, the MEK continued its peaceful political activities. On June 20, 1981, more than 500,000 people turned out in Tehran to protest the emerging dictatorship. On the orders of Khomeini, the Revolutionary Guards opened fire on the peaceful demonstration, killing dozens and wounding hundreds. Thousands were arrested and hundreds summarily executed that same night. The reign of terror had begun. In July 1981, while still in Iran and before leaving for France, Rajavi initiated the formation of a broad political coalition, the National Council of Resistance of Iran, NCRI, inviting all democratic opposition groups and personalities to join. In the 1980s, the NCRI led an international campaign to end the Iran-Iraq War. In 1983, the NCRI proposed a peace plan, later welcomed by the Iraqi government and supported by some 7,000 parliamentarians, government figures, and dignitaries worldwide. In 1986, the French government struck a deal with Tehran to secure the release of French hostages held by Tehran's proxies in Lebanon, forcing Mr. Rajavi to leave France for the Iran-Iraq frontier. In 1987, he formed the All-Volunteer National Liberation Army of Iran, which evolved into a well-trained, formidable, mechanized army which destroyed Khomeini's war machine, forcing him to accept the ceasefire in the Iran-Iraq War. In 1988, Khomeini issued a fatwa ordering the massacre of 30,000 political prisoners, majority of them MEK members and supporters. His then heir apparent, Ayatollah Hossein Ali Montazeri, called the massacre the greatest crime in the Islamic Republic's history. he was immediately sacked. In 1993, the NCRI unanimously elected Mrs. Mariam Rajavi as president for the transitional period after the fall of the clerical regime. Mrs. Rajavi's task will be to oversee the peaceful transfer of power to the Iranian people through free elections for a national, legislative constituent assembly within 6 months of the mullah's overthrow. In 1997, in a move that Clinton administration officials acknowledged was a goodwill gesture to Tehran, the U.S. designated the MEK as a foreign terrorist organization.
The last thing I want to share with you
In 2002, the NCRI, relying on information provided by the MEK network inside Iran, exposed the regime's secret nuclear weapons program. These revelations triggered inspections of nuclear sites by the International Atomic Energy Agency and led to the imposition of crippling sanctions on Tehran by the international community.
And we've been absolutely, totally vindicated.
Following a 15-year legal battle, Britain and the European Union delisted the MEK, and in 2012, the United States followed suit by revoking the MEK's designation. In 2009, millions of Iranians, especially women and youth, came out onto the streets of Tehran, demanding an end to the dictatorship. The regime brutally cracked down, leaving hundreds killed or wounded. In December 2017, mass uprisings broke out in Iran, spreading to 142 cities in a matter of a few days. Protesters chanted, "Death to Khamenei, death to Rouhani." The regime's supreme leader, president, and the Revolutionary Guard's commander-in-chief publicly acknowledged the MEK's role in the protests, which have continued despite heavy repression. Some 120,000 fallen heroes since 1981 have deepened the MEK's roots in Iranian society, enhancing its ability to lead the overthrow of the regime. In more than a century since the Constitutional Revolution, and half a century since Dr. Mossadegh's death, neither the Shah nor the mullahs have been able to extinguish the Iranian people's yearning for freedom and human rights as the struggle has reached new heights, bringing the prospects for democracy, independence, and the rule of law in Iran closer than ever.